Of all the actions that took place during the Battle of Normandy, the fighting for the Cotentin Peninsula was undoubtedly one of its most important events. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were launched on the Cotentin Peninsula on June 6, 1944, and the 4th American Infantry Division landed in its Utah sector. From here, intense fighting took place for more than 20 days, fighting for Sainte-Mère-Église, Contentin, the division of the peninsula, and finally fighting for the important port of Cherbourg. With that said, let's get started. For the defense of the Cotentin Peninsula, which constituted the westernmost sector that the Allies assaulted on June 6th, the Germans had a total of 3 divisions. The 709th Infantry Division protected the east coast of the peninsula. The 91st Division protected the central sector, while the 243rd Infantry Division protected the west coast. At a general level, they were divisions with little combat capacity and had many soldiers from the Soviet Union among their ranks. In total, German forces in the sector can be estimated at around 35,000 troops. The original Allied plan, which emerged in mid-1943, did not contemplate landing on the Cotentin Peninsula and only intended to land in Omaha, Gold, and Juneau. Later, in early 1944, Montgomery decided to include both the Utah and Sword sectors to speed up the capture of both Cherbourg and Cayenne. Due to the superiority of Allied forces over the Germans, the Allies were interested in stretching the front as much as possible to prevent the Germans from concentrating their divisions. In addition to General Barton's 4th Infantry Division, which was to land in Utah, the Americans would launch 2 airborne divisions with some 13,000 men in total on the Cotentin Peninsula. Although during the initial plan, the 82nd Airborne Division was going to be launched further south to directly cut off the Cotentin Peninsula, when the Allied command discovered the presence of the German 91st Infantry Division, they decided to change the plan. Broadly speaking, the objective of the airborne divisions would be to take the city of Sainte-Mère-Église, protect the bank of the Meurthe River, prevent the Germans from flooding part of the peninsula by opening the locks near Contentin, and secure the runners leaving Utah Beach inland. Finally, it should be noted that after the landing of the 4th Infantry Division on June 6th, the 9th and 90th Infantry Divisions will follow behind as quickly as possible. The American attack began during the early hours of June 6th with the launch of the 2 airborne divisions. The first to do so was the 101st Airborne Division at around 0:20 hours, and the second was the 82nd Airborne Division at around 1:15 hours. Although the 82nd Airborne fell in the vicinity of Sainte-Mère-Église, the 101st Airborne fell north of Contentin and in the rear of the beach, where a few hours later the 4th Infantry Division would land. Although it is always said that the parachute launch was a disaster, the vast majority of parachutists fell in quite groups. Although some aircraft were lost and ended up throwing men far from the objective, these errors served to increase confusion within the German side. Little by little, and in just a few hours, the paratroopers took all their objectives before the 4th Infantry Division landed in Utah. The bombing carried out in Utah was much more effective than that carried out in Omaha, due in part to the fact that they could not afford to bomb the interior of the peninsula to avoid killing their own paratroopers. Furthermore, although the landing was planned at the height of the German resistance point, numbers 10, 9, and 8, which had barely been damaged by aviation and naval artillery, an error caused the 4th Infantry Division to end up landing in front of the point of resistance. Resistance number 5. Another fortuitous blow was that this resistance point was practically destroyed as a direct consequence of the impact of a bomb, and in addition, the sector was defended mostly by Georgian soldiers who did not put up much resistance. The fact that indicates the relative ease with which General Barton's men took the beach is that they only suffered 12 deaths. However, the total casualty count was almost 200 men, including another 60 dead because their boats collided with an underwater mine. Once they took control of the beach at around 7:30 in the morning, the men of the 4th Infantry Division, with General Theodore Roosevelt at the head, they began to make their way through the corridors that the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne had cleared. The main problem that the Americans had in leaving Utah Beach was that the interior area had been flooded by the Germans to facilitate their defense, and there were only 4 corridors available. Although the paratroopers had taken the inner part of the corridors, the infantrymen had to fight against the German troops who were retreating inward. Because they were very narrow, with only 1 or 2 vehicles able to circulate through them, the small German resistance delayed the advance of the men of the 4th Division for a few hours. However, by the next day, they were able to connect with the paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne in Sainte-Mère-Église, which represented one of the main communication axes of the peninsula. As a general rule, the German reaction was quite slow and disorganized, which helped compensate for all the Allied errors. On the other hand, the German High Command had anticipated that the pace of landing of Allied troops would be relatively slow, and that would give them time to organize the great counterattack of their panzer divisions. However, the speed with which the Allies began to deploy new divisions into Normandy completely surprised them. By the night of June 6th, more than 150,000 Allied troops had already set foot in Normandy, while the arrival of new German reinforcements was completely hindered by Allied air attacks. The first 2 divisions to be sent to the Cotentin Peninsula were the 9th and the 90th. In this way, the 4th Infantry Division, which had assaulted Utah, continued advancing north along the coast, while the other 2 infantry divisions advanced towards the center of the peninsula. Finally, the 2 airborne divisions were responsible for protecting the base on the peninsula in the vicinity of Contentin. For their part, the Germans received reinforcements from the 6th Parachute Regiment, which headed towards Contentin, the Waffen-SS Berlichingen Division, and the 77th Infantry Division, which came from the vicinity of Saint-Malo. Next to the thing in the direction of Cherbourg, there was the Crisbeck Battery, which was able to resist the American assault for 5 days. By June 11th, the position was isolated, and Lieutenant Walter Omsen's men had run out of ammunition. It was at this time that the order to withdraw to Cherbourg reached them, and Omsen had to leave behind 21 wounded German soldiers and 126 American prisoners. With his remaining 78 men, he was able to break the encirclement and retreat north to continue fighting. The German lieutenant received the Knight's Cross for this action. Meanwhile, further south in Contentin, the 101st Airborne was able to definitively take the city on June 13th, after repelling the last German counterattacks. With this action, the Omaha and Utah sectors could be connected, and the entire Allied beachhead in Normandy was unified. From here, the race began towards the west coast of the Cotentin Peninsula to isolate the Germans who were in the vicinity of Cherbourg. This action would be led by the 9th Infantry Division and the 82nd Airborne. Finally, the peninsula was cut off during the night of June 17th near the city of Port Bale by the men of the 9th Division. This action left the remains of the 243rd, 77th, 91st, and 709th Divisions isolated north of the Cotentin Peninsula. Coincidentally, that same day, a meeting between Rommel, Rundstedt, and Hitler had taken place near Paris to analyze the situation in Normandy. One of the main topics of the meeting was precisely what was happening on the Cotentin Peninsula, which was about to be isolated. Rommel was in favor of abandoning it before it was too late, while Hitler ordered German troops to hold their positions to prevent Cherbourg from falling into Allied hands. The taking of Cherbourg was one of the Allies' priority objectives because its large port would allow troops and supplies to be landed more quickly. The Germans had built strong defenses at Cherbourg, although they were aimed at repelling an amphibious attack and not an attack from their rear. When the Germans were isolated north of the Cotentin Peninsula during the night of June 17th, Hitler ordered General Schlieffen, commander of the Cherbourg fortress, to hold out there to the last man. The American deployment to advance towards Cherbourg was as follows. The 4th Infantry Division would do so along the east coast. The 79th Infantry Division, which had just landed in the sector, would do so through the center along with the 4th Cavalry Group. and finally the 9th Division would do so along the west coast. The 90th Division would remain in reserve, whose function would be to protect the southern flank from any possible German counterattack. The attack began on June 19th against the weak line that the Germans had been able to establish in the middle of the peninsula. After initial German resistance, the German line gradually cracked. The only thing that the Germans had in their favor is that the northern sector of the Cotentin Peninsula is much steeper than the south, which gave them defensive advantages. However, American superiority in naval artillery, aviation, infantry, and tanks forced the German defenders to retreat to the outskirts of Cherbourg in just 3 days of combat. During the night of June 21st, General Collins sent an ultimatum to General Schlieffen to surrender the city of Cherbourg. After receiving no response, the American general ordered the attack on Cherbourg on the morning of June 22nd. The first action was a massive bombardment that devastated the destroyed city. When the infantry units began to advance, they were surprised to find much stronger German resistance than they expected. After 2 days of intense fighting on the outskirts of the city, by June 24th, American troops began to enter Cherbourg. By June 25th, with the city completely surrounded, the Americans again requested the surrender of the garrison. Again, the Germans refused. The German denial caused the city to begin to be bombed with all possible intensity by the Allied fleet, which left no stone unturned. It was not until the next day, June 26th, when the Americans reached General Schlieffen's command post, that the German general was forced to surrender along with the 800 men in his command center. However, the German resistance in the vicinity of the port still continued fighting. General Collins tried to get Schlieffen to give the order to surrender to the defenders of the port, but the German general refused because he had sworn before the Führer that he would maintain the defense of Cherbourg for as long as possible. The final fight for the port ended the next day, but before surrendering, the Germans completely destroyed the port, causing the Americans to spend almost a month to make it operational again. It is estimated that among the 7 American units that fought on the Cotentin Peninsula from June 6th to June 27th, which also included the 2 airborne divisions, the Americans suffered approximately 22,100 casualties. The 2 divisions that had the most casualties were the 4th and 9th, with about 5,400 casualties each, and the 2 airborne divisions with 4,400 casualties each. For their part, the Germans lost about 39,000 men in deaths, wounded, and prisoners, with the number of prisoners estimated at about 20,000 soldiers. Regarding the capture of the port of Cherbourg, it should be noted that it was planned to take it on June 14th, or at the latest on the 21st. Despite everything, it ended up falling on the 27th, finding itself completely destroyed and inoperative. Well, what do you think? Could Cherbourg have been taken earlier and thereby accelerate the landing of supplies in Normandy?